G'day YouTube viewer, welcome to my initial impressions of the Harley Davidson Heritage Softail Classic after picking it up from the dealership and Mick Potts giving me a run through of the bike.
Thanks Mick.
Cheers mate, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep this video short because I'll be doing a review on this bike very soon. My first impressions on this bike though is a number of things really surprised me. Immediately after I hit the road, the first two big things I noticed were how quiet this is for a Harley. Now that's obviously because of Euro 5 emissions and the exhaust sound has to be mellowed because of that. But even though it was fairly quiet, as soon as you hit the accelerator a bit, you could feel that thunderous power vibrating beneath you, and you could certainly feel the potential the bike possesses with an aftermarket exhaust. The 114 motor, no surprise, sounds fantastic, and even in its muted state it still did sound very good every time I accelerated. But at idle and just above, it was barely noticeable, the sound of the engine. The second thing I really noticed was how comfortable this bike is. Now, I'd seen YouTube reviews, I'd expected it to be comfortable, but far more comfort than what I realized it would have. Now, my most recent experience with another cruiser is a Honda Rebel, which has mid-mounts, and in that case your knees are higher than your hips, your feet are fairly high, and you do feel it in the hip flexors. Not all the time, but sometimes. After you settle in it gets more comfortable, but after an hour and a half, 2 hours of riding, you really do need a break. What I noticed with the Heritage Softail Classic is it was so comfortable that it wasn't really on my mind until I stopped at a traffic light and thought, oh wow, this is amazing. I would describe my feet position on the bike as mid-forward, but because of the floorboards, you can move your feet around and just put them in the position that's where they fall, which is automatically the most comfortable. And then when you need to hit the brake or the gear shift, you just move them forward for that purpose. The other thing I realized after the hour-long ride home was you could move your feet around as much as you wanted. The seat is more comfortable than anything I've ever experienced on any other motorcycle. Sure, I've seen reviews where they say you can't move around much on it, but I didn't feel I needed to because I could move my legs so much. The other amazing thing about the motorcycle were the handlebars and your arm position. Just so relaxing. I've never had mini apes, or apes for that matter, never used them before. And on this bike, it's just your arm just fell into a natural position right in front of you, not feel like you're leaning forward or leaning back or anything, just comfortable. Shoulders completely relaxed, which is not always the case on a motorcycle. So they were just perfect. I've never felt more relaxed on any other bike. In terms of the windscreen, up to 80 to 90 kilometers an hour, or around 50 miles an hour, there was nothing, no buffeting from the front. But it was a very windy day riding home, so at around 100 kilometers or 60 miles an hour, I was getting a little bit of buffeting from the sides. Not sure if that was because it was such a windy day or whether this is a trait of that fairly straight up and down windscreen. I guess time will tell on that one, and we'll talk about more about that in the review. The next thing I noticed were how effective the rear view mirrors were. Now, when I saw the bike, and when I've seen pictures of the bike on YouTube and other pictures on Google and things like that, the rear view mirrors sit just above the handlebars. But because they're a Mini 8, what I didn't realize was at that point it puts the rear view up above your arm level. So looking into those mirrors and seeing the road behind gives a perfect view. There were no parts of my arm in shot at all, so that was really, really good, and that really surprised me. Now, being a Harley, I expected the gearbox and the clutch and the way that all works to be clunky, and I wanted that. That's something that is authentic to a motorcycle of this size and scale, and that harks back to a bygone era. But it wasn't as clunky as I expected. The Rebel 1100 that I've been riding recently is more clunky than this Harley in terms of, and they've done that, the Japanese have done that deliberately to give that sort of Harley feel. I imagine some of the older bikes in the Harley range would be more clunky than this, but this is just the right amount of clunk. It's got that authentic feel, that authentic real world feel, but not too much, just the right amount. Now, watching reviews, I expected the lean angle to be much more limited, much more restricted than what I felt. Sure, I was riding very gently on the way home. First ride on the bike, hasn't been run in, didn't go around corners very fast, took it very gently. But I went through the Kiama bends at 80 kilometers an hour, which is the speed limit. Some of those corners, they're not overly tight, they're long flowing corners, but at that speed you do lean a fair way, and there was no risk of touching the floorboards on the ground. So the lean angle is greater than what I expected. The weight of the bike, now being a Softail, it's around 100 pounds lighter than, say, the Road King. I didn't want a big heavy bagger, a big heavy touring bike. I wanted a Softail, but a bike that had the looks of a bygone era. Now, the influence for this Heritage Classic goes back to the 1950s in terms of styling and things like that, which is why I bought the bike. I love that look and the modern touches as well. And the weight on the road, even though this is much heavier than any other bike I own, I have 6 other bikes, this one is at least 50 kilos heavier. Was not noticeable because you're sitting so low, the weight of the bike on the road is so low, the center of gravity, that's what I mean, that you really don't feel the weight at all. Lugging the bike around, it does feel heavy in terms of trying to push it forward and back, but not so much on the lean. Now, there was a little bit more tech on the bike than I realized. Again, I wanted more old school and not too much in the way of intervention, but this has some lovely little touches like the trickle charger, like the self-cancelling indicators, the way the immobilizer works, and security. I'll talk about this more in the review, but the little touches of technology it has, of course the cruise control, are just perfect for the bike. They just make it easy. It was my first time using self-cancelling indicators and they were amazing. Obviously when you change lanes you still have to turn it back off. But in terms of going around the corner, I would go around the corner, look down, and it had already turned off, so they are very effective. The other thing I loved was the tube valve coming out the side rather than straight up and down in the wire spoke area. I thought that was really cool. So summing up my first impressions and thoughts about this bike and how it really feels and everything else is how easygoing and easy to ride it is. I've never felt more relaxed or comfortable on any motorcycle. I think I said that earlier, I'm saying it again. This is just such a relaxing, beautiful place to be. And just a few other final thoughts. Another thing that stood out to me is how shiny and glossy the black color of this bike is, and the way they've done the fins for the air cooling on the engine that gives it that chrome look. I know it's not chrome, but it gives it that chrome look in that area, just modest amount, just perfection. So the paintwork looks so rich and glossy, I'm just wondering, how do I protect it? Do I do a ceramic coating, pay over $500 for a ceramic coating, or do I get a ceramic wax and do it myself? There's probably other options as well, but I want to treat the bike, so if it gets bugs on the paintwork or a bird flies over and does its business or things like that, I want to give it a little bit of protection until I can clean it. And I want the water to bead off, and obviously wax does that effect even if you've ceramic coated it and things like that. So I'm looking for advice, so if you have some comments on what's worked or what works for you, I'd really love to hear those. I'm open to advice and I would be very grateful for any feedback you can give in that area. So they were just my first thoughts. I am going to do a review within the next fortnight on everything I think about the bike. That were just the things that jumped out at me as I rode home. It was an hour-long ride. A lot of it was on highway, freeway style roads, but I made sure once I got near home I did some streets, some slow riding around streets, and went up and down the gearbox like Mick Potts suggested, and then out on some country roads that are restricted to around 60 kilometers an hour, where I barely got out of third gear. But it meant that I used all the gears in a rev range, a responsible rev range for a bike being brand new, and gave it a good run in all sorts of conditions. Please like and subscribe to the channel, and I look forward to you joining me in the next one.